The air around me was alive with music and laughter, the perfect soundtrack to what was meant to be the happiest day of my life. I stood there, draped in my white gown, feeling like a princess. But, in an instant, that fragile sense of joy shattered. "Linda, dear, could you come here for a moment?" My mother-in-law's voice, sharp and insistent, cut through the celebration like a knife. I excused myself from my friends and walked toward her, sensing the change in the atmosphere. Her posture was rigid, her smile tight, as if it had been carefully painted on. "What now?" I wondered, heart suddenly heavy. "What is it, Mrs. Dalton?" I asked, my voice calm but guarded, my mind racing. "It's about the way you look at me, Linda," she said, her words dripping with accusation. "I know a look of contempt when I see one. I'm your husband's mother, and I deserve respect, not disdain." I blinked in surprise, the words hitting me like a slap to the face. What is she talking about? "Mrs. Dalton, I assure you, you're mistaken. I have nothing but respect for you," I said, my voice steady, but confusion rose like a tide inside me. "Respect? Ha!" Her laugh was bitter, mocking. "I've seen the way you roll your eyes, the little sighs when I speak. You think I'm blind? You've turned my own son against me." Her voice rose, sharp enough to draw the attention of nearby guests, their curious gazes now turning toward us. "Mom, what's going on here?" My husband, Mark, appeared at my side, his brow furrowed with concern. His gaze darted between us. "Your wife," Mrs. Dalton began, her voice breaking with emotion. "She's been disrespectful to me. Always looking down on me. And today, on your wedding day, she's been the worst." She sobbed, clutching at Mark's arm, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. "Linda, is this true?" Mark turned to me, his expression a blend of disbelief and rising anger. "No, it's not true," I said, my voice firm, a surge of injustice filling my chest. "I've done nothing of the sort." "You're lying," Mrs. Dalton wailed, her face contorted in feigned hurt, her hand gripping Mark's arm like a vice. "I'm your mother. Would I lie to you?" And then it happened. Mark's hand rose, striking me across the face in a stinging slap. The sound rang out through the room, the sudden silence heavy and suffocating. I stood there, my cheek burning, a dazed confusion clouding my mind. How could he do this? How could he choose her over me? I whispered, the words barely audible. They weren't for Mark, and they weren't for Mrs. Dalton, they were for the universe itself, for a life that had just gone horribly, horribly wrong. "I didn't mean to," Mark stammered, his voice cracking as his anger turned to confusion and regret. "No," I said, my voice steady, calm even, though a storm raged within me. "You've shown me exactly who you are." I turned away from them, addressing the shocked crowd around us. "I'm sorry you had to witness this. Please, continue to enjoy the celebration. I just need a moment alone." With that, I walked away, the whispers already starting to swirl behind me. But I held my head high. This isn't the end. It's the beginning of something bigger, something I could control. I could feel the plan forming in my mind, a plan for justice. This humiliation would not go unanswered. Once alone in the bridal suite, I allowed myself a moment to collapse. The tears fell, hot and heavy, but they weren't just tears of pain. No, they were tears of something else, determination. I wouldn't be a victim anymore. I would be a victor. After the wedding incident, I knew that if I was going to get the justice I deserved, I needed evidence, hard, undeniable proof. So, I turned to Mr. Grayson, a private investigator known for his discretion and effectiveness. "Mr. Grayson, I need your help," I said, my voice quiet but resolute. My husband, Mark, and his mother, let's just say they've been less than kind. I understand, Linda. What exactly are we looking for? His tone was calm, professional. I need evidence of their behavior, I said. Anything that shows a pattern of emotional, financial, or even legal abuse. Consider it done. I'll start with surveillance and background checks. I'll dig into their pasts, their finances, everything, he assured me. Armed with this mission, I began recording every phone call, every conversation, every encounter with Mark and Mrs. Dalton. I needed it all, every piece of the puzzle. And in the midst of this, I found solace in my friend Sarah. Sarah, I don't know how I'm going to get through this without you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to, Linda, she replied, her voice steady and reassuring. I'm here for you. Always. So, what's the plan? I'm collecting evidence, I said, feeling the weight of it all. Mr. Grayson is helping too. I'm going to expose them for who they really are. Be careful, Linda, Sarah warned, her voice tinged with concern. They won't see this coming, and they'll be furious. I know, I said, determination hardening my resolve. But I can't let them get away with it. Weeks passed, and the evidence started to pile up. Mark's tone on the phone was often aggressive, demeaning. His financial records revealed Mrs. Dalton's tight grip on his assets, with transactions that hinted at something darker. Fraud? Possibly. One evening, Sarah and I sat down to review the findings. Look at this, Sarah, I said, my voice low, my heart pounding. These bank statements, large sums of money moving around, but to where? And these emails, they're planning something. But what? We need to connect the dots, Sarah said, her eyes widening with realization. This is more than just emotional abuse. It's a web of lies and manipulation. As I dug deeper, it became clearer. Mark and his mother weren't just toxic. They were involved in something much bigger, something criminal. Linda, I think they're embezzling funds from Mark's company, Sarah said, her voice trembling with the weight of the discovery. These documents, they're incriminating. This is serious, Sarah warned. You need to be careful. They won't take kindly to being exposed. I know, I said, my voice fierce. But I can't back down. Not now. The evidence is overwhelming. They're not just cruel, they're criminals. It was time. Time to make a plan. Time to bring them to justice. Sarah, I'm going to expose them publicly. Linda, that's risky, Sarah said, her tone both concerned and admiring. But if anyone can do it, it's you. With Sarah by my side and the evidence in hand, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about justice. The next step was clear. It was time to bring the truth to light. I organized an event under the guise of a big announcement, inviting friends, family, and, just as importantly, media contacts. The venue was lavish, buzzing with anticipation. Thank you all for coming, I said, standing at the front, my voice steady. I know you're all curious about the big news. Mark and Mrs. Dalton stood beside me, beaming, completely unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. Linda, darling, we're so proud of you. Whatever the announcement, we support you, Mark said, his words dripping with insincerity. I've gathered you all here to share some important truths, I said, my voice unwavering. Truths about my marriage. Truths about the Dalton family. The room fell silent. Mrs. Dalton's voice quivered, a mix of confusion and fear. Truths, she whispered. What are you talking about? I paused for dramatic effect, feeling the weight of the moment. I'm talking about the abuse, the lies, and the illegal activities that have been happening behind closed doors. The room was still. The tension was thick. Now, there was no turning back. Linda, have you lost your mind? Mark's face turned bright red, barely containing his rage. Quite the opposite, Mark, I said, my voice calm, steady. I've never been more sane. Never been more sure of what I need to do. The room buzzed with anticipation, the air thick with tension as I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment everything would change. Exhibit A. I gestured toward the screen behind me, where the video began to play, my heart pounding as it showed a recording of one of Mark and Mrs. Dalton's heated, abusive exchanges. The crowd gasped. Whispers spread like wildfire, growing louder with every second. Mrs. Dalton's face drained of color, her hands trembling, the illusion of control shattering before everyone's eyes. This is just the beginning. I wasn't done yet. I held up a folder, the weight of it in my hands almost symbolic, filled with documents that would bring everything to light. These documents show financial irregularities, embezzlement, fraud. I let the words hang in the air, and the reactions were immediate. Eyes widened. Murmurs escalated. A sense of disbelief rippled through the room. Mrs. Dalton's voice cracked, pleading, desperate. You can't do this, Linda. You're ruining everything. I'm not ruining anything, I replied, my voice unwavering. I'm exposing the truth. A truth that everyone needs to see. The cameras clicked incessantly, capturing every second of this revelation. It felt like the world was watching as the facade that had been so carefully crafted by Mark and his mother began to crumble. Linda, please, let's talk about this privately. Mrs. Dalton's voice had turned to a whisper, but it was too late for that. The world needed to hear it all. No, Mrs. Dalton. No more private discussions. I was done hiding, done pretending. The time for that is over. With every piece of evidence I presented, the crowd's shock deepened. Some shook their heads, others whispered among themselves, trying to process what was unfolding. Mark and Mrs. Dalton stood frozen, their faces masks of disbelief, their lives shattering with every word. This was my story. A story of survival. Of standing up against abuse and injustice. I had no intention of being the victim any longer. The event concluded in a flurry of activity. Media swarmed around me, asking questions, while some guests offered words of support, admiration, and even awe for my bravery. But as I walked away from the podium, the weight that had burdened me for so long finally began to lift. I had done it. I had exposed them. And in that moment, I felt victorious. The courtroom was cold, intimidating, a fitting place for the final chapter of my journey. As I sat there, my lawyer by my side, nerves and determination clashed within me. I couldn't help but notice how unnerved Mark and Mrs. Dalton looked. Across the room, their faces were filled with anxiety. Your Honor, we are here to present the case against Mark and Mrs. Dalton, not just for a divorce, but for years of emotional and financial abuse, my lawyer began, his voice steady and authoritative. Linda, you can't win this. You're going too far. Mark's desperate whisper reached me from across the room, a mixture of anger and fear in his tone. This isn't about winning, Mark, I responded, my voice calm but unwavering. It's about justice. It's about showing the world who you really are. The trial unfolded. The evidence, irrefutable, was laid bare. The recordings. The financial documents. Everything that painted the real picture of my life. A life of manipulation, control, and abuse. Your Honor, as you can see, the evidence is overwhelming, my lawyer said, his words carrying the weight of my truth. We seek not only a divorce but also appropriate legal actions for the wrongs committed by the defendants. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. Mrs. Dalton's voice cracked as she pleaded, but even she couldn't seem to believe her own words. Linda is exaggerating. Exaggerating? I said, my voice rising with conviction. The evidence speaks for itself. You can't hide from the truth anymore. The judge, after reviewing the overwhelming evidence, didn't hesitate. In light of the evidence presented, I grant the divorce and order legal actions against Mark and Mrs. Dalton for their conduct. The gavel struck. And in that instant, a rush of vindication surged through me. I had done it. I had stood up to them, and I had emerged victorious. With the legal battles behind me, I stepped into the next chapter of my life, a chapter of healing. I found a peaceful retreat in the countryside, far removed from the chaos and pain of my past. Sitting on the porch of my new home, a warm cup of tea in hand, I took in the tranquil view before me. The trees swayed gently in the breeze. Birds chirped softly in the distance. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. This was it. A new beginning. A life free from lies, manipulation, and pain. My journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. I had survived. I had triumphed. I had found my strength, reclaimed my voice, and now, I was finally free. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. The future, though uncertain, was mine to shape. A future filled with hope, healing, and happiness. This was my story of triumph. A story of a woman who refused to be silenced. A woman who stood tall against all odds. And as the curtain fell on Linda's journey, the question lingered, do you believe that Linda's decision to expose her husband and his mother publicly and take legal action was the best course of action? Could there have been another way to handle it? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more compelling narratives. Your support helps us bring more stories to life.